Welcome to Huawei's just announced 2020 foldable smartphone, the Mate XS, and I actually got the chance to spend a full day alone with it, so I'm going to tell you everything you need to know and what actually happened. So I started the day at 11 AM with 100% battery, and from this point I was allowed to do whatever I wanted with the phone, as long as I was back by night, because, well, it was still highly confidential. So I decided to take it to 3 London locations, each so I could test a different feature: the traffic light tree, the Natural History Museum, and finally a place called God's Own Junkyard, which was just spectacular, but I'll get to this. For starters, as we were heading to location 1, a few things became very clear about the Mate XS. This is a smartphone first, foldable second, and that's a good thing. Compared to, say, Samsung's Galaxy Fold, where when you're not actively using the main inside display, you're kind of inhibited. You're stuck on this tiny little screen on the front. Huawei's design means that even when it's folded up, it's still pretty much just a normal looking modern flagship phone, albeit a chunky one at 11mm thick. The display on it is good. It's an 8-inch 2480 by 2200 OLED panel, and compared to last year's Mate X, one of the more obvious changes is how it opens. You're still pressing a release catch on the back, but you'll notice straight away that the display kind of flies out because it's got a more powerful spring-loaded mechanism. And even more importantly, there are now over 150 parts in the hinge alone to make it feel firmer and snap together more convincingly for both the closing and the opening. Anyways, time to jump into the London Underground. But of course, the reviewing never stops. There is still a crease in the display where the fold is, and how obvious it is depends massively on the lighting around you, but I would say most of the time it's less noticeable than for its foldable peers. The more impressive feat though is just how razor thin it is when you unfold it. The body is just 5.4mm thick. That's the equivalent of taking a really slim smartphone and chopping an extra 30% off it. Huawei has also added these little oval-shaped pieces at the pivot points to stop any dirt getting under the screen. Now, while on the rail, it was also a pretty good chance to start testing the camera setup. The main camera has a 40-megapixel sensor, which actually has no optical image stabilization, but uses the company's most advanced AI stabilization. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, having both would be better, but at the same time, the AI alone can handle situations like this. The software is essentially an open source version of Android 10 paired with Huawei's MIUI 10, so it's the same general look, the same customization, and the same dark mode that you're used to. It took a while, but we eventually reached location number 1, the traffic light tree, and I don't really know what to tell you. There is no reason an abomination like this should exist, but I'm kinda glad it does, because it's a great opportunity to play around with what I think is one of the coolest features of the phone. Before that though, it's worth pointing out that as well as the main 40-megapixel camera, the phone has both an ultra-wide and a 3x optical zoom lens. So that just means you can go from being really far from your subject to appearing rather close. And as an example, this shot was taken with 6x magnification. This in itself isn't anything new though, but the very nature of this being a foldable phone lets you do something that is. Tapping on this icon in the corner turns on mirror mode, so that when you take a photo of someone, they can at the same time see how they look, sort out their hair, potentially position themselves the way they would want to be positioned. When I describe it, it sounds obvious and simple, but in my opinion that solves one of the biggest pain points of asking someone else to take a photo of you, because most of the time they don't know how you want it. Add to that I'm a massive fan of efficiency, so I love the fact that instead of having one set of cameras for the front of your phone and another set of cameras for the back, you can just flip the phone around and use its main rear camera to take selfies. The obvious upside is that these selfies are the same quality then as images from the rear camera, even in portrait mode, which is actually aided by the 4th camera, which is this little 3D depth sensor at the bottom. Anyways, time to head to location number 2. As curious as I was about how an ornament like this in the middle of a very real roundabout is anything but a serious hazard. If, by the way, you're enjoying this video, a sub to the Mr. Who's the Boss channel would be incredible. Now was a pretty good time to register my fingerprint and see how that works on foldable, because bear in mind, the trade-off of having cameras on the back of your phone only means that there's no face unlocking. It works well though. The fingerprint scanner is actually bundled in with the power button, so by the time you've pressed the power button to turn your screen on, it's already checked for your fingerprint, and you're in. Nothing in London is as close as it seems. So for a quick pit stop on the way, we hit up a coffee shop, using it as a base camp to try a few more things I've been meaning to. For starters though, you might have noticed already by how light reflects on this front display that it's actually not entirely flat. It's a plastic display, with actually more layers than ever for even better shatter resistance, but that just means that it's ever so slightly domed. You do stop noticing it after a bit though. Now's also a good time to mention that the chipset in the phone is the Kirin 990 5G, which has two implications. Most obviously, well, 5G. You might know that we can broadly split 5G waves into two categories. You've got the ultra high-speed waves with only a narrow range, and medium-speed sub-6 waves, which aren't as quick but can travel much further. Well, this Kirin chip supports sub-6 only, so I tried downloading a game on 5G. It didn't have that kind of snappy instantaneousness of wave, but it was still fast, and I guess more importantly, the 5G worked in almost every area of London we visited, which I was not expecting. The other side to this Kirin chip is the fact that it's a real solid performer. It's around a 25% speed bump from the company's last gen, and that means that games fly. Plus, something I'm not used to on a foldable is having app adaptability, the idea that when you open your display, your content will adjust to fill the entire 8-inch panel. With some apps, this is an amazing feature. With others, you might lose some important info, but just the fact that you don't need to restart the app from scratch is in itself an improvement from what I'm used to. Off we went again, and as we neared the Natural History Museum, we found well, okay, it's just a road really, but I liked it, and it kind of shows the contrast between the older London architecture and the newer buildings. I really can't stress enough how much of a benefit it is to have your rear cameras on your face. Like, all of a sudden you've got the same 4K quality video, the same stabilization as you would have on your normal primary camera on your face. This is like cinematic quality vlog footage. So right now we're off to see the Natural History Museum, and low-key I'm quite excited to see some dinosaurs. Let's do it. One quick London Underground trip. I'm totally ready for the day they start handing out loyalty cards for this, and 20 minutes of steering a suitcase through crowds of people, trying not to knock kids over, we arrived. And actually at this point, something I'd forgotten to show you earlier is that the other cool thing about having just one set of cameras is that even on the front, you can use your ultra-wide lens for, let's say, group selfies. You can even use the zoom camera if you're really confident about the quality of your skin. Alright, so we have just arrived at the Natural History Museum. Take a look at this. The building is literally, it is immense. So immense that I think before I even realized what I was doing, my hands were already out taking a photo, and it's almost like this building was built to take panoramas of. Not a fan of blowing my own trumpet, but pretty happy with how this turned out, and it seems like I wasn't the only one. Inside we went, and I'd forgotten just how stunning the place is. The scale of this building and the fossils inside of it, it's just colossal, and so you might have guessed it was time to find a high point for an ultra-wide camera shot. On the way though, a couple more things to point out about the phone. The Mate XS has a zero-gap design, i.e. when it's folded up, the screen is at a complete 180-degree angle, and you can't see in between. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is that the only way Huawei's managed to make the main body so slim is that it pretty much just contains the battery. Almost every other actual smartphone component is fitted into this narrow bar on the side. So that battery is 4,500 mAh in total, split between two cells that sit on either side of the fold, and in terms of the battery life that gives you, well, that's part of what we're figuring out today, but so far at least we're on about 65% battery after 3.5 hours of heavy usage. Now, because of how Huawei's crammed literally everything, the cameras, the chipset, the antennae, into this little block on the side, it needs better cooling. So compared to last gen, they're now using a triple cooling system, a flexible graphite layer that spans both sides to keep the batteries cool, and a vapor chamber inside the main block. And finally, before we leave, here's that ultra-wide shot that, come to think of it, we actually came for. Oh yeah, and of course, there's one thing you can't leave a museum without visiting. It's the gift shop. And we were off to our third, final, and hopefully most impressive location. And by this point, I'd become quite familiar with the phone, especially how intuitive the multitasking is. You open one app, in this case, let's say the Sun newspaper. You then swipe in from the side to get a multitasking bar, and whatever you drag from there immediately becomes a second window. That's pretty normal smartphone multitasking, but the coolest part is that you can get a third app involved that'll, just by default, become a floating window on top of the two apps you're already running. I wouldn't hesitate to call this the best Android multitasking experience out there, and even if you don't want to use the big screen for doing lots of things at once, you can still just scale single applications, and they generally work well.
Final destination. It's a place, I think it's called God's Own Junkyard, and I've never been. I just saw some Google image results of it and I was like, that is the perfect place to test the phone's low-light capabilities, because in theory that is something that Huawei is good at.
It turns out though, this location I'd been planning to visit was not particularly close, so far out that it only just classes as being in London, and see, the closer we came to it, the dodgier the area got. Oh yeah, and it was incredibly windy.
I don't know where we are. This is really dodgy. I feel like we're lost. I blame you. You blame me.
By some miracle though, we found it. I was giggling like a schoolchild when I saw the sign, confirmation that we hadn't just travelled for an hour and risked our lives to hang out in an empty industrial estate. It describes itself as heavenly junk in a hell of a location, and I can vouch for the accuracy of that description. We headed inside, and it was neon paradise.
This whole place is so eerie. There's like, it's in the middle of nowhere, there's like nobody here. But we're gonna get some amazing footage.
And that we did. Literally anywhere you turn, there is a new photo to capture. So I used the phone's night mode, which in this lighting takes 5 seconds per shot to draw out as much detail as possible. And these are the results, completely unedited. I would have taken more, but it turns out someone had privately hired the location, and to put it nicely, they told us to pay up or find the exit. Anyways, time to head back. I'd got most of what I wanted anyways, so we parked up in a coffee shop just to take my SIM card out and transfer footage to my laptop before handing the phone back to Huawei. While I was out there, some final observations. When unfolded, the Mate XS functions largely as a full-size tablet. You get tabbed browsing like you would on a laptop, and decent quality audio thanks to it using both the bottom-firing speaker and an earpiece on the front. I would say though, while the main 8-inch display is fantastic for reading, if you're just going to be watching a video, you're probably better off with the smaller front display, because the wide aspect ratio suits content better. As well as your 5G SIM, the phone also supports a Huawei NM card to expand storage and comes pre-baked with 512 gigs out the box anyways, as well as 8 GB of RAM. Interesting to note that the battery, in the end, really pulled through. I did burn the first 30% quite quickly in the early afternoon, but as I spent less time recording videos in the second half of the day, we made it quite easily. There was still about 40% left as I finally handed it back at 6:30 PM after 7.5 hours of usage, which is actually not bad at all. If you enjoyed this video, there is a whole playlist of day in the lives on my channel, so I'll leave that linked somewhere from here, and a sub would be amazing. Stuff like this takes an absolute age to put together, but I think it's worth it. Let me know if you do too. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss. I'll catch you in the next one.